The party was still going on upstairs. People were laughing. Glasses touched. Music drifted through the house. Nothing about the evening was supposed to become historic, but downstairs Princess Diana had stopped pretending. It was 1989. She was 28 years old. Her marriage to Prince Charles was already under enormous private strain, even though the full story had not yet been exposed to the public, and somewhere inside the house were the two people Diana was looking for. Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles, standing close to Diana, was one of the few men in the building whose responsibility had nothing to do with royal appearances. Ken Worf, her Metropolitan Police Protection Officer. He was there to keep Diana physically safe. But on this particular night, Diana was walking towards something no bodyguard could protect her from. She believed her husband and Camilla were together, and she had decided to confront them. Worf later described accompanying Diana as she searched downstairs. His account places him near the confrontation, although he withdrew from the most private part of the exchange rather than standing over Diana's shoulder listening to every word. Diana's own later recordings preserve what she said happened inside that room, Document Pub. That distinction matters, because this is not a story about a bodyguard secretly overhearing palace gossip. It is something more revealing. Worf saw Diana before she walked in. He saw the people she found, he saw her fear, and afterward he heard enough from Diana and witnessed enough of her reaction to understand that something fundamental had changed. The woman who went downstairs was frightened of Camilla. The woman who came back upstairs had looked directly at the secret destroying her marriage, and said, "I know, to understand why those words mattered, you have to understand the position Diana believed she had occupied for years." The public saw a princess. Diana increasingly saw herself as a wife living inside a relationship whose emotional rules had been written before she arrived. Charles and Camilla had known one another before Charles married Diana. Camilla had married Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973. Charles married Diana in 1981, but Diana later described Camilla's continuing presence as one of the central wounds in the Wales marriage. Charles would eventually publicly acknowledge adultery, while saying his relationship with Camilla resumed only after his marriage had become irretrievably broken down. Time. Those are the public facts, but marriages do not collapse as public facts, they collapse in rooms. Telephone calls, expressions, absences. Questions answered too quickly. Questions never answered at all. Diana later described becoming increasingly suspicious. There were moments she interpreted as evidence that Charles remained emotionally attached to Camilla. And the most painful part was not simply what Diana feared might be happening. It was the feeling that other people already understood. Friends knew the history, members of the social circle knew Charles and Camilla's closeness. Staff could observe movements and moods. Diana increasingly felt that she had been placed inside a story everyone else had read before her. She was the wife, yet somehow she felt like the outsider. That is what made silence so powerful. Nobody needed to tell Diana directly that she was wrong. They only needed to avoid confirming that she was right. Don't ask. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass anyone. Don't destroy the evening. Smile. Continue. For years, Diana did continue. Then came the party. It was being held for the birthday of Camilla's sister, Annabel Elliot, at the home of Lady Annabel Goldsmith, near Ham Common. According to Worf's recollection, Diana's attendance itself surprised some people. She knew Camilla would be there. Charles knew she knew. And still Diana went. Document Pub. Perhaps part of her still wanted to prove that she could survive the same room. Before we continue, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And when the story is over, come back and tell us what you thought. We'd love to hear your honest review. Now, let's get back to the story. Perhaps she believed appearing beside Charles mattered. Perhaps she was tired of being the person expected to stay away. Whatever the reason, she entered the party. At first, nothing happened. Dinner. Conversation. Guests moving between rooms. Diana maintaining the outward rituals expected of her. Then she noticed something. Charles was gone. So was Camilla. That changed the atmosphere. Diana began asking where they were. People reportedly discouraged her from searching. That response may have told her more than an answer would have. Why stop her? Why tell her to leave it? Why was everybody suddenly uncomfortable? Diana went looking for Ken Worf. When she found him, according to his later account, she was emotional and determined. She wanted to locate Charles and Camilla. Worf advised caution. He understood what a confrontation could mean. There were guests upstairs. Charles was the Prince of Wales. Diana was one of the most photographed women alive. One loud argument could become a story. One overheard accusation could escape the house. A protection officer is trained to reduce danger. Everything about Diana's plan looked dangerous, but she was not asking permission. She wanted him nearby. So they moved downstairs. Picture that staircase, the noise of the party becoming softer above them. Diana descending, wharf behind her. Every step carrying her father from the public performance upstairs. There were no photographers down there, no crowds, no balcony, no royal wave, only the thing Diana had been trying to force herself to face. At the bottom, they found Charles and Camilla together. Worf later recalled the awkwardness of the encounter. Charles and Camilla rose. Diana approached. She wanted Worf to remain with her, but he judged that what was about to happen was deeply personal. He moved away while remaining close enough to respond if needed. Document pub. And then Diana confronted Camilla. Diana later recorded her account for material that became associated with Andrew Morton's biography. She remembered being terrified. That is worth holding on to. Terrified. Because later versions of Diana can make this scene look inevitable. By the mid-1990s, the public knew a far more assertive woman. A Diana capable of giving a television interview watched by millions. A Diana who publicly discussed adultery and the collapse of her marriage. A Diana who could walk into a hospital ward, challenge stigma around AIDS, or stand among victims of landmines while the world's cameras followed. But that woman was still developing. In 1989, Diana later said she was frightened of Camilla, and she walked toward her anyway. Sunday Independent. That is courage in its least glamorous form, not fearlessness, movement despite fear. Diana later described telling Camilla that she knew what was happening between her and Charles. She said she understood that Camilla might regard Diana herself as the obstacle, but Diana wanted one thing made absolutely clear. She knew. Then came one of the most revealing lines associated with the encounter. Diana recalled telling Camilla not to treat her like an idiot. Sunday Independent there it was. The real accusation. Not simply, leave my husband alone, something deeper, stop asking me to doubt what I can see. For years, Diana had experienced a gap between what she felt and what was acknowledged around her. The confrontation closed that gap. She was no longer asking whether her perception was valid. She was announcing that it was. Camilla, according to Diana's account, responded by pointing toward everything Diana possessed. She had the admiration of men. She had enormous public attention. She had 2 beautiful sons. What more could she want? It was almost the perfect question for Diana's life. What more could she want? Look at the photographs. What could possibly be missing? She lived in royal residences. Designers competed to dress her. Crowds shouted her name. William and Harry adored her. Millions of strangers considered her one of the most beautiful women on earth. What could the princess possibly want? Diana's answer collapsed the entire fairy tale into 4 words. I want my husband. Her recorded account of the confrontation preserves that response. Sunday Independent. Not another palace. Not another title. Not more attention. Not revenge. Her husband. That sentence tells you why public admiration could never repair Diana's private life. The world loved her. But the world's love was not the love she believed she had been promised. The crowd could cheer her. It could not sit beside her at breakfast. A newspaper could call her beautiful. It could not make a marriage intimate. A photographer could prove she was desired. He could not prove she was loved by Charles. And so the woman who apparently had everything stood in front of Camilla, explaining the one thing she believed she did not have. Her husband's heart, that was the emotional truth underneath the jewelry. The carriages, the balconies, the titles. A young woman wanted her marriage, and she believed another relationship was standing inside it. Worf was nearby. He did not hear every private word Diana later reported, but he saw the transformation around those words. When Diana emerged, he remembered a different energy in her. She had confronted the person she had feared confronting. Nothing had magically been fixed. Yet something inside Diana had been released. That matters because popular versions of the story sometimes turn the confrontation into a victory scene. It was not. Camilla did not vanish. Charles did not suddenly recommit himself to Diana. The Wales marriage did not heal. There was no apology that restored the past, no cinematic ending. Diana would still suffer. The marriage would deteriorate further. Charles and Diana formally separated in December 1992, and their divorce was finalized in 1996. Wikipedia. So what exactly did Diana win downstairs? Reality. Her own reality. That sounds small until you understand how much of her anguish came from uncertainty. Before that room. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe I'm being jealous. Maybe everyone else understands something I don't. After that room, I know. That word had changed meaning. Diana had not controlled Charles. She had not controlled Camilla. But she had reclaimed control over what she was willing to acknowledge, and according to Worf's account, the immediate aftermath showed how emotionally charged the night had become. Diana returned upstairs. Charles and Camilla appeared later. The social performance resumed. People talked, the party continued. But Diana could no longer return to the precise emotional position she had occupied earlier that evening. She had crossed a line. Then came the drive home. Cars appear repeatedly in Diana's story because royal cars were strange spaces. Public figures disappeared behind dark windows, the crowd vanished. The performance ended. What happened inside stayed inside. On that journey, the tension between Charles and Diana surfaced. Worf later remembered the hostility and emotional aftermath of the confrontation. Diana had managed restraint while facing Camilla. Later, the cost came out. Document pub. This was another pattern that people frequently misunderstood about her. Diana could appear composed during the decisive moment and collapse afterward. Observers would then focus on the collapse, the tears, the emotion, the anger, and use that as the explanation for everything, but reverse the order. First came the situation, then came the emotional response. First came years of uncertainty, then came anger, first came fear, then came confrontation, first came the marriage, then came the wound. Diana's emotion was not the beginning of the story. It was evidence that a story had already been happening to her. That night, Worf saw it at close range. Not the tabloid version, not a photograph, not an anonymous palace source. A frightened woman asking her protection officer to walk downstairs with her because she was about to confront the person she associated with the deepest insecurity in her marriage. Think about the irony. Ken Worf could protect Diana from a physical threat. He could inspect buildings, check vehicles, control access, watch crowds, coordinate escape routes, but he could not protect her from discovering that the threat she feared most was already inside her private life. There was no security procedure for that. All he could do was remain nearby and watch. Years later, the confrontation became more important because Diana's voice survived. The recordings connected with Andrew Morton's work allowed the public to hear her interpretation of events in her own words. Morton's involvement in telling Diana's story would itself become a major moment in the battle over how the Princess of Wales was understood publicly. PBS's Frontline later interviewed Morton about his reporting and Diana's role in the process. PBS. The woman who had once needed a bodyguard near the stairs eventually helped create a record of what had happened behind closed doors. That was a profound change. In 1989, she confronted Camilla privately. By the 1990s, Diana increasingly challenged the public narrative surrounding her marriage. Then came 1995, the Panorama interview. Diana was asked about Camilla's role in the marriage. Her answer became one of the most famous lines ever spoken by a modern royal. There had been 3 people in the marriage, she said, making it crowded. By then the world understood, but the sentence had begun years earlier. Not in a TV studio. Downstairs at a private party with Diana saying, "I know that is the thread." 1989. I know, later. The world will know. And once you understand that, Ken Worf's role in the story becomes fascinating. He was not merely a witness to scandal, he witnessed transition. He saw Diana before some of the most consequential years of her public life. He saw her uncertain, impulsive, funny distressed, determined. And on this night he saw her confront something she had previously feared. His later recollections portray the confrontation as emotionally significant for Diana because she emerged having finally faced Camilla directly. Document pub. Not healed, changed. There is a difference. Healing implies the wound disappears. Change means the wound remains, but the person carrying it is no longer the same. Diana's marriage would continue collapsing. She would make mistakes of her own. The history of Charles, Diana and Camilla cannot honestly be reduced to a fairy tale with one perfect victim and 2 cartoon villains. Real relationships are messier. Diana herself had relationships outside the marriage. Charles had his own version of when and why the marriage failed. Camilla had her own life, marriage and perspective. But none of that erases what the 1989 confrontation represented to Diana. She believed she had spent years being asked to coexist with a truth nobody wanted to state plainly. That night she stated it, and afterward, silence no longer had the same power. Go back downstairs one final time. Forget what happened later. Forget the divorce. Forget the TV interviews. Forget the books. Forget the coronations and rewritten titles. Stay in 1989. The party is upstairs. Diana is 28. Her marriage has not formally ended. The public does not yet know the full scale of its problems. She looks for her husband. He is gone. Camilla is gone. Diana finds Ken Worf. She tells him she wants to find them. He advises caution. She keeps walking. Down the stairs, toward the room, toward the woman she has admitted she fears. Charles and Camilla are there. Worf sees them. Diana asks him to remain near. He steps away from the private conversation but stays close. Then Diana speaks. She tells Camilla she knows. She refuses to be treated as foolish. Camilla reminds her how much she already has. Fame, admiration, children, the life millions envy. And Diana answers with the one thing the fairy tale cannot supply. I want my husband. Then she walks out. No victory music, no reconciliation, no miracle. Just a woman who has finally said aloud what everyone had been avoiding. And when Ken Waff looked at Diana afterward, he was not looking at someone who had solved her marriage. He was looking at someone who had crossed a psychological boundary. The frightened princess had entered the room wanting acknowledgement. She came out no longer needing permission to believe herself. That was what nobody at the party was prepared for. Not the accusation, not even the confrontation, the change, because once Diana stopped asking whether she was allowed to name what was happening, the entire balance shifted. The secrecy could continue, the marriage could continue, the palace photographs could continue, but Diana's silence could not. And years later, when millions finally heard her tell the story herself, the world understood that the real turning point had happened much earlier. In a quiet room below a crowded party, with a bodyguard waiting nearby, and 4 painfully ordinary words from one of the most famous women on earth. I want my husband.